Does this make sense? So what I'd like for us to do, just as more people have trickled in, if you turn to the persons next to you, introduce yourself, share some names. How do you bring this practice of contemplation into your life? And where is it that you could go? In New York City, maybe in the boroughs, Botanical Gardens, Central Park. We, as we roll out more kind of post-COVID, etc., intend, inshallah, at some point post-Ramadan, to just have monthly excursions where we are going as a community to places where all we're going to do is just reflect. You bring a notebook and you sit with yourself. You find a spot that is your spot to sit and just think and to be with you. When the weather gets warmer, maybe we'll go to Bear Mountain. When the weather is nicer, maybe we'll go to the Poconos. If people can bear it, maybe we'll go when it's snowing outside. I won't be with you at that time. But to understand this as a practice, that's important to recognize that the specificity of it doesn't have to be replicated. Because we're going to talk about this, but the Prophet doesn't go back to the cave of Hira after this period of revelation in that way. There's some things that'll come up when he's not gotten the next series of revelations, but it's not that he's going back to the cave of Hira every year of his life. Do you get what I mean? There's different things embedded in the prophetic practice of where and how he engages in practices of seclusion, the etikaf, this stuff. And what some people will say is that this time that he's spending in the cave of Hira is quite often also during the month of Ramadan in those calendar years, which is where we do etikaf at the end of Ramadan, so it's just kind of continuity. But I'd like for you to think for a bit right now and turn to the persons next to you. Where could you do this thing in New York? Where you can just gaze on something that has natural beauty to it. A place where you find stillness and solitude that isn't about being away from people, but about being away from distractions, that allows for you to start to engage in a readiness of what can only be experienced, because there's nothing without meaning in Allah's plan. And so Allah is bringing his prophet, his last prophet, to a place where he has to be ready inwardly and outwardly to receive revelation. It's not an easy thing. We're going to talk about it in 20 minutes, but that's not going to be just, I'm walking through the streets of Mecca, and then the angel appeared, and, oh man, I'm a prophet, right? He's still being weaned to a place where these days, months, into years, we'll talk about it after this discussion, but wahi starts 6 months before Iqra comes at the cave of Hira in the form of dreams that the prophet starts to get that are true visions. Like every night he's dreaming something that the next day shows him is just real. You got to have an inward strength to be able to have that. And when you're situated in concrete like this, every single day, seated at a desk like this, staring at one of these for the entirety of your days and your weeks, it's not that easy to be receptive to what beauty is that's being thrown at you, you know? So we're in New York City, right? We're not in the Maldives. We're not in Cape Town. We're not in Hawaii, right? Alhamdulillah that we are where we are. But strategically, you got to be able to think as part of your spiritual diet, drawn from the prophetic biography. Where can I go that's not just about solitude, that is, I'm going to go sit in this office or this part of the library, but in specific, a part of what is nature-based. Something that has just natural beauty to it. It doesn't mean that you actually go there. That's step number 2. But identifying it and thinking about what are now the things that it can allow for me to have openings around. What are the advantages of having this with regularity? When can I go? Where are the times in my routine that will allow for me to engage in this as a practice? The question makes sense? So we can turn to the persons next to you and just talk it out for a bit, and then we'll come back and discuss and kind of move forward with it. But go ahead. Okay, so what are some of the things that we're discussing? Yeah. Can you talk a little louder? Yeah, amazing. Other thoughts? Yeah.
And my buddy here has like a lot of cool solitude things going on. It's really awesome.
Would you like to share any?
One thing he said that I kind of we just started talking about him driving. When I stopped, I was telling him, I'll share a personal thing. I stopped driving maybe 7 years ago. And because I have some visual issues. And that was like the toughest thing to like let go of, like the ability not to drive at such a young age. But I felt like when I did drive, I could just get away. Like, you know, whatever's going on in life or at home, just get in your car and go into nature. Like go to some obscure park in suburban New Jersey. And I moved to New York for that reason, because I couldn't drive anymore. But like alhamdulillah, I found more peace in New York City finding solitude than I ever did in suburban New Jersey. Because there's so many places here, like you said, like people are more attracted to lights and this and shopping and commercialism. There's a lot of quiet places in the city if you actually go there, like actively search for it. And I feel like alhamdulillah I found those places, but he kind of just reminded me of driving. Like that was my cave. And now I hate sitting in cars, like because it kind of reminds me of like the past, almost like an ex-girlfriend, like something that you had and it's gone, right? But yeah, I know my buddy here was saying that driving in the morning was his like solitude, like driving to work kind of reminded me of like, you know, the past, like the old days and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's an amazing frame, right? You want to pull out a notebook and just write at the top, what's my cave? Do you know? And you have to be able to answer that question. And if you don't have one, I'm going to say this to you because I love you, you don't care about yourself enough then. You cannot let out what needs to be let out if you're always immersed in everything that's being shoved in. If you're just consuming and consuming and consuming it in real time, how can you both consume it and let go of it simultaneously? Do you get what I mean? And when you have hard decisions you have to make, it becomes imperative to know what your cave is. Because if you're just surrounded and situated by greed constantly, by anger constantly, by gossiping constantly, by grief constantly, by anxiety constantly, you're taking it in through all of your sensory perception, and it's impacting now the inner state. The opportunity to be away from it, immersed in something that is one of the more key ingredients to spiritual growth that is embedded in our tradition, is just silence. Silence is different from stillness. They have a relationship, but silence is a very important thing to just be comfortable with. من كان يؤمن بالله وباليوم الآخر فليقل خيرا أو ليصمت, that whosoever believes in Allah in the last day, let them speak good or be silent, is setting now the qualification to when you speak is only to speak good, and that the default is silence. And silence is where you start to now have opportunity for openings that allow for you to become aware. Because try to think about this, right? I talk a lot. If you hang out with me, I don't really talk so much. Growing up, I was very quiet. I just kind of sat by myself. My kids were sitting with me the other day. I don't even know what we were talking about, but my daughter said something to somebody. This is what my life is like. I'm on a Zoom with people, and my children are sitting next to me. There's like no boundaries. And my daughter is telling the person, my dad doesn't like talking to people. You know, and this person's already in place. They're like, I feel bad, I'm taking your time. I was like, please don't pay attention to my child. She's a delinquent. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Do you know? But I'm not a very talkative person. It's not easy also to be someone who talks a lot, whose job also requires a lot of listening. And the opportunity to experience both of those things, where I talk a lot, but I also have to listen a lot, and to then see where there is overlap, but also where they exist in conflict. You can't learn if you're not listening. And if you're speaking, you're not able to listen. And so when you're in a space where you're situated in silence, it allows now for the absorption of things that are not rooted just in verbalized expression, but you're taking it in through other aspects of sensory perception. You can start to hear, and then from the hearing, you start to listen. You don't just see, but you use seeing as a bridge to perceiving. Do you get what I mean? If you don't have this in your life, you have to bring it in. I don't know when the start date is going to be. It's not going to be before Ramadan, but it will be inshallah after Ramadan, where at least once a month we take people just to go someplace that's away, and it's not going to be a hangout. You can sit and chatter and talk, but then we're going to not bring you next time, right? It's just going to be finding a spot where you bring a book, and then it's just about reflection and contemplation. We can sit and debrief the way we debrief together. But to actualize some of these practices, not just theorize about them. There's no advantage to knowing it's beneficial and then not doing it. And you say Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim at least 17 times a day, but the idea is not, Ya Allah, show me the straight path just so I know it's over there. You're asking to know where the straight path is so that you have the tawfiq to walk on it, right? So that you move on it. Do you get what I mean? So what's the point of these conversations if you don't do something with it? You're not honoring the right that your heart has over you if you don't take time for this as a practice. So you have to ask yourself, what is my cave? Where do I go to find that stillness and I find peace and comfort with silence? There are a few things in our tradition that just gazing at them becomes a source of ajr and benefit. One of them, for example, is when a child looks at their parent. There's ajr in this, right? If you have somebody that you love deeply, there's times I look at my babies and I just start crying because I love them so much. And you can feel the transformational aspect of just gazing upon one that's your beloved. The Kaaba is one of these things. When we went for Umrah just a week ago, one of my favorite experiences is when we take people and get them in front of the Kaaba and they see it for the first time. And just looking at what that's like for them experientially, it's remarkable to see the reaction that takes place. But you can look at the Kaaba, and there's gain in just looking at the Kaaba. And the Prophet is situated in a cave that looks at the Kaaba. How many of you ever climbed Jabal Nur to the cave of Hira? Yeah. And if you've seen the cave of Hira before, it's not a big thing, right? If anything, one person can fit in it. And if you go these days, you can't even see it because there's seas of people engulfing this thing. They're all trying to somehow get in while someone's coming out. The fact that more people don't slip and fall off of this mountain as this is happening is mind-boggling, But it's as if this thing was just made for this purpose. It's a random crevice, this mountain, and it has in its line of sight what it is that becomes so near and dear to the prophet of God. And he has this now for him, and he's engaged in a regular practice of going there to just reflect and to think and to contemplate. You need a cave in your life. You have to love yourself enough that you build that as a regular practice. Does it have to be every day? No. Can it be weekly? Maybe. Can it be even monthly? Yeah. It takes a little bit of light to push away darkness. And at the juncture that most of us are in our lives, respectively, we have major decisions that we have to make quite often. And most of us don't make choices well or know how to make a choice because we're exhausted constantly. And the exhaustion is not solved just from this, but it'll be a part of creating alleviation of some of it. What is your cave? 6 months prior to Nabuwah, Wahi coming in the form of revelation, Iqra, read, the Prophet starts to have these true visions. There's a hadith that says that dreams are 1/46 of prophethood. And so if you do the math, 6 months to 23 years, right? That's 1 to 6 as a ratio as such. Do you get what I mean? You can do the math of the 6 months to the 23 years, and it's going to bring itself down to this ratio of 1/46 of prophethood as dreams. Because 6 months he's having this series of true dreams. There's different ways that the prophet experiences revelation. And before we look at this hadith in a little bit of detail, we want to understand some of these things. One, the prophet had these true dreams. There's 3 types of dreams that a person can have. One is a dream that just comes from Allah. Another is a dream that comes from shaitan. May Allah protect us from it. And the third is a dream that's just a recollection of your thoughts, right? Some of the distinguishing factors between a dream that comes from God and a dream that comes from shaitan is the state that it leaves you in. If the dream leaves you terrified, it's probably a good chance it's coming from shaitan. If the dream is something that is still vividly remembered but has a different sense of kind of reaction to it, Allah knows best. It's one of those things also that you want to talk to people who know what it is that they're talking about if you feel like you're having dreams that are meaningful in some way. And that's not every single person. Not the thing to just Google and say, what does this mean in a dream, right? Because you're going to find every single answer that makes no sense whatsoever. There are people who this is a skill that they have. Most of us just have dreams that are in this kind of last category of like a recollection of our thoughts at the end of the day, you know? But this is one form of revelation that gets cited of a series of forms. Another is a form when the angel appears to the Prophet ﷺ in a manner where there's inspiration, but not physical appearance, right? When we talk about this moment of Iqra read, the angel appears in his true form. But there's a form of revelation, secondly, where the angel is giving an inspiration, but there's not an appearance of an angel. There's a form where the angel will appear in the form of an actual human being. So we know from the prophetic tradition, there's the Hadith Jibreel, the angel Gabriel comes in the form of a man, described as wearing clothes that are like whiter than white. Hair is very dark and looks like it's just been washed. No signs of travel upon him, etc. But the angel takes on a human form. You have a form that is very difficult, which is described as like the toll of a bell. And this was like a very serious form of revelation where the angel would like squeeze the Prophet ﷺ very tightly to the extent that even if it was a cold day, sweat and perspiration would start to come from the Prophet ﷺ. There's a narration in a hadith that describes the wings of the angel being something that makes a noise like the sound of a chain going over rocks as they tremble from the command of the divine. Right? Just try to picture what that's like experientially. And the Prophet would feel like the heaviness of the weight of the revelation and the sound of what was like a ringing bell. And there was extreme weight, like in the most literal of senses. There's narrations where the Prophet is on a camel as he gets revelation. The camel literally is brought to its knees as a result of this. Companions speaking about their legs being under the Prophet's legs and the sheer physical weight that's coming. Why is this an important thing to understand? It's not like an easy task, the responsibility of prophethood and the experience of revelation in and of itself is very heavy. You then have a fifth form of revelation where the angel appears in his true form, right? And this happens twice to the Prophet ﷺ. And then another form of revelation is where there's nothing between Allah and the Prophet. This happens, for example, on Isra and Miraj. The Prophet ﷺ has direct conversation with Allah Azza wa Jal. Musa ﷺ has this experience with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. But these are forms of revelation. And so for 6 months now, the Prophet ﷺ is in a place where he has this period of true dreams. And there's other things that he starts to notice as well, where it says that like objects around him, the trees, rocks, start to give him salams. There's hadith that we find in Sahih Muslim where the Prophet ﷺ identifies like a rock that he still knows where its location is that would greet him and give him salams. The ability to ascertain meaning from this is not just in the moment, but comes after the fact as well. And these are things that are bringing him to this place experientially of being ready to kind of receive this revelation. And you want to think about it in the frame of like the dreams that he's having. When we read this hadith of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, she's going to say that those dreams also now become intrinsically linked to the acts of tahannuth that he's engaged in. Now he's got something else to think about during this time, right? Like he sees it at night and then it actually manifests in this way during the day. You got to think about how strong the Prophet is in every aspect of strength, emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, to be able to have this experience and still be able to move forward with the wherewithal to have normalcy in his life. Do you know? Like, what would you do if you went to bed last night and then you woke up and you saw all of this and you walked in here and you're like, what is going on? And then that happened to you consistently for 6 months in a row. And I want you to think about it from the standpoint of where we have a tendency to kind of think from a capitalistic viewpoint or other modes of viewpoints. The Prophet's ego doesn't get in the way at any point. If you walk down the street and the sun of Arabia is blazing upon your skull and there's a cloud that just walks with you, you're in a place where, like, objects that no one can hear, but they're still greeting you, right? The trees shed tears when the Prophet is now ascending to a mimbar and not leaning against it in Medina anymore to give khutbah. And you don't get to a place where you think, by virtue of these things, that you are above everything else in a way that renders arrogance and condescension. May Allah protect us from this. But he still has this baseline humility, still in a place where kindness and generosity permeate everything that he does. And so as he's leading now into this place of receiving revelation, the Prophet ﷺ is in the cave of Hira, and he's visited by the angel Jibreel, who comes in his angelic form, that the entire horizons are just filled with the angel. So people want to just pull up this hadith. You can pull it up on your phone. If you Google, like, Aisha, Book of Revelation, Bukhari, it'll pop up in the first kind of hit on various websites. If you go on my search, the second hit was sunnah.com, and it brought up Imam Bukhari's book. And the only difference between this and the first hit was this has the Arabic in it too. The first one has only the English. And if you scroll down to the third hadith that says narrated Aisha, al-Mu'mineen Aisha, the commencement of the divine inspiration to Allah's messenger. That's the hadith we want to look at. Does anybody have it in front of them? Yeah. Can somebody read it? Yeah, go ahead.
Narrated Aisha, the mother of the faithful believers. The commencement of the divine inspiration to Allah's apostle was in the form of good dreams which came true like bright daylight, and then the love of seclusion was bestowed upon him. He used to go in seclusion in the cave of Hira, where he used to worship Allah alone continuously for many days before his desire to see his family. He used to take with him the journey food for the stay and then come back to his wife Letitia to take his food likewise again till suddenly the truth descended upon him while he was in the cave of Hira. The angel came and asked him to read. The prophet replied, I don't know how to read.
Yeah, keep going.
The prophet added, the angel caught me forcefully and pressed me so hard that I could not bear it anymore. He then released me and again asked me to read, and I replied, I do not know how to read. Thereupon he caught me again and pressed me a second time till I could not bear it anymore. He then released me again and asked me to read, but again I replied, I do not know how to read, or what shall I read? Thereupon he caught me for a third time and pressed me, and then released me and said, read in the name of your Lord who has created all that exists, has created man from a clot. Read in the name of your Lord, the most generous. Then Allah's apostle returned with the inspiration, and with his heart beating severely.
Okay, so let's reflect on this for a bit, right? The hadith is longer. The second parts to it we'll talk about next week. He's talking to Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha. But we want to start to extrapolate from the hadith in and of itself. Right from the onset, Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha is narrating this hadith. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, she's not alive when this is taking place. You know? So how is it that she's experiencing like this hadith in this way? What is it telling us? just so we can get talking. If you can turn to the person next to you, like, what is this like giving us insight into? That she's the one that's narrating this hadith. For those who don't know, Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, later on, after Khadija passes away, she marries the Prophet alayhi salam some substantial time later. But she's here now narrating this hadith. So what do we take from this, that she's the narrator of the hadith? You can just turn to the person next to you, 2-3 minutes. Like, what insights can we draw from that? And we'll come back and discuss. Okay, so what are some of the things? Like Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha is telling this hadith. Like, what are some of the things we can kind of extrapolate from that? Why is that an important thing for us to think about? Yeah.
Obviously, it was impactful in the Prophet's life, and as I understand, Aisha was his second great love in marriage. So certainly, as it was without a doubt life-changing, as we have the Quran as a result of it, he certainly would have discussed it with her, I would think.
Yeah, but what does that mean that he talked to her about it? Because these are like real human beings, right? They lived. Do you know? Because anybody could have been narrating this hadith. Abu Bakr could have narrated the hadith, right? You could have had Umar narrate the hadith. Yeah.
They had a close husband-wife relationship and they trusted each other.
Yeah, right? They talked to each other. The Prophet's telling his wife, like, what things were like for him when he was younger. You know, they have that kind of ability to communicate and have that insight. She is somebody, radiallahu ta'ala anha, who isn't the only one that talks to us about hadith attached to Revelation. You go through this entire book, this entire chapter in Imam Bukhari's book is just on Revelation. It's the book of Revelation, right? There's other companions. But the Prophet, when he's married to his wife, they still have this healthy mode of communication. There's still opportunity for them to learn and lean on each other through sharing their lived experiences, talking about things that were meaningful, things that had like a deep impact on them, that isn't solely about, hey, Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, you know, let's sit down because one day you're going to have to teach people about Islam. Do you know? But he's sitting with his wife. The hadith is going to tell us when we go into next week, right? Dhambaluni, dhambaluni, datharuni, datharuni, cover me, cloak me, cloak me. The Prophet thinks he lost his mind. He thinks he's been possessed by something demonic when he talks to Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha. There's a vulnerability that's there that's very real. Their love is very real and their support of each other is very real. So when you sit and you are talking to someone who you care about and they care about you, You have an opportunity to gain insight to the fact that this is a fully autonomous human being. You're not marrying yourself. You're not in a relationship with yourself. And you don't know why someone is the way that they are. The only way that you can really understand is by listening. And how can you listen if you're the one that's talking, right? So the Prophet ﷺ is telling his wife about a day that was very impactful, but also that had all of these visceral responses in terms of everything that's going to come forward. So you try to picture and contextualize that he's explaining to her, this is how revelation started. This is what was going on. This is what I was experiencing. This is what I was going through. And she's describing it as she understood it to come from him, meaning she was actually listening to him talk about this stuff. That she cared about him enough that even when he's relating to an incident that is attached to Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, a woman who Aisha says later on, expressions of just how she has a sense of jealousy towards the relationship the Prophet had with Khadija, but her absorption of it is giving still an indication that there's a commonality of love. There's a reciprocity of love that's there. And they talk to each other about themselves. You know? If you're in a relationship with somebody who doesn't want to hear about you, there's probably a problem. Or if you are in a relationship with somebody and you don't give them room to talk about themselves and just self-express, also a problem. So Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha is telling us about something that she didn't even witness because her husband is able to talk to her about himself and things that he has gone through. You have to let the people in your life be in a place where sometimes they just let out what they're holding. Think about the number of people who always offer a solution to your pain, or they give you an explanation as to why you are the cause of what you're going through. How many people do you have that just affirm and validate your feelings? Have helped you to learn how to self-heal and self-cope through self-love that is not unhealthy, but is rooted in something that is very healthy. That doesn't have to offer solutions in the onset, but just validates what is being experienced. This is hard. This is not hard. There's hadith where Aisha asked the Prophet, like, what is the hardest day in your life? And he says, Taif is the hardest day in his life. Why are they having conversations like this? Do you know what I mean? When you were growing up, how many times did you ask your parents if there was something you could do for them? Doesn't mean you're selfish, but just think about the way you get wired, you know? At this point in time, when you see somebody who's clearly struggling, how awkward do you feel to the point that sometimes you hope maybe they won't see me seeing them crying? Or when you actually ask someone how they're doing, and then they try to talk to you about how they're doing, in your head you're like, I didn't really want to know any of this. Do you know? These people had relationships where they could actually open up to each other. They could actually talk to one another. They wanted to hear what the other person was going through. You know how many people sit in my office and apologize to me when they try to talk to me about stuff that they're carrying? It's crazy that we live in a world where you have to feel bad about just asking someone to hold something that you're holding. Do you get what I mean? So when you read hadith, you want to read them in their entirety. You want to know about the people who are narrating the hadith. Don't just read it, but try to understand it and take from it. Do you get what I mean? So Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, she is now telling us about the Prophet ﷺ's experience with the commencement of wahi. Can somebody read the Arabic of the hadith, just so we hear it, the barakah of it, and also we'll draw back from the Arabic of it. Does anybody have it in front of them?
I can read the Arabic one.
Yeah, go ahead.
حدثنا يحيى بن بكير قال حدثنا الليث عن عقيل عن ابن شهاب عن عروة بن الزبير عن عائشة أم المؤمنين أنها قالت أول ما بدأ به الرسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من الوحي الرؤيا الصالحة في النوم، فكان لا يرى رؤيا إلا جاءت مثل فلق الصبح، ثم حبب إليه الخلاء، وكان يخلو بغار حراء فيتحنث فيه وهو التعبد الليالي ذوات العدد قبل أن ينزع إلى أهله ويتزود لذلك، ثم يرجع إلى خديجة فيتزود لمثلها، حتى جاءه الحق وهو في غار حراء، فجاءه الملك فقال اقرأ، قال ما أنا بقارئ، قال فأخذني فغطني حتى بلغ مني الجهد، ثم أرسلني فقال اقرأ، قلت ما أنا بقارئ، فأخذني فغطني الثانية حتى بلغ مني الجهد، ثم أرسلني فقال اقرأ، فقلت ما أنا بقارئ، فأخذني فغطني الثالثة، ثم أرسلني فقال اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق الإنسان من علق، اقرأ وربك الأكرم. فرجع بها رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يرجف فؤاده، فدخل على خديجة بنت خويلد رضي الله عنها فقال زملوني زملوني، فزملوه حتى ذهب عنه الروع، فقال لخديجة وأخبرها الخبر لقد خشيت على نفسي، فقالت خديجة كلا والله ما يخزيك الله أبدا، إنك لتصل الرحم وتحمل الكلب وتكسب المعدوم وتقري الضيف وتعين على نوائب الحق. فانطلقت به خديجة حتى أتت به ورقة بن نوفل ابن أسد بن عبد العزي ابن عم خديجة، وكان امرئ تنصر في الجاهلية، وكان يكتب الكتاب العبراني، فيكتب من الإنجيل بالعبرانية ما شاء الله عليه، وكان شيخا كبيرا قد عمي، فقالت له خديجة يا ابن العم اسمع من ابن أخي، فقال له ورقة يا ابن أخي ماذا ترى؟ فأخبره رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم خبر ما رأى، فقال له ورقة هذا الناموس الذي أنزل الله على موسى صلى الله عليه وسلم، يا ليتني فيه جزعا، ليتني أكون حيا إذا يخرجك قومك، فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أو مخرجيهم؟ قال نعم، لم يأت رجل قط بمثل ما جئت به إلا وعود، وإن يدركني يومك أنصرك نصرا مؤزرا، ثم لم ينشب ورقة أن توفى وفطر الوحي.
Jazakallah khair. So we're going to focus on the first part. It's a beautiful hadith. There's so much that you could take from it in so many different ways. You want to spend some time with it, just reflect upon it, think about it. The nature of what we're talking about right now, Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, she's giving us a lot of different insight here in terms of just the process we were talking about. And so when she gives the commencement of wahi is started in the forms of these dreams that the Prophet has when he's sleeping at night, And this then is linked to the love of tahannuth, consequently, because he has now this link. He's experiencing this. He's going to reflect upon it. One of the things that becomes important to understand is that when she's defining what he's doing in this tahannuth, she says that he essentially is doing ibadah, right? She utilizes the word for worship. And here, when he is engaged in this worship, it creates an expansiveness for us to be able to understand what does worship actually mean. Because if I said to you the Prophet was worshiping in the cave, this is Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha saying it. You got to again know who the narrator of the hadith is. She's not just like some person who's using words. She, in and of herself, is like a deep legal scholar of our tradition. She knows her fiqh inside out. She has a sound understanding of every facet of religion, and she's calling what the Prophet was doing in the cave a form of worship. Your mind might automatically take you to the performance of salah, right? Like your 5 daily prayers. There's no established daily prayers at this time. He hasn't even gotten the first revelation of Quran yet, right? But this process of breaking away from society is still identified as a form of worship. The contemplation, the reflection that he's engaged in, the hadith is saying that this is a ta'abbudi act that he's engaged in. He's engaged in worship. So you can make expansive this idea. You're not creating worship. Do you know what I mean? I don't have the authority, just like you don't have the authority, to say, you know what, when we pray Isha in 20 minutes, we're going to pray 6 rak'ahs instead of 4 rak'ahs, right? You can't do that. That's not how it works. But you also can't silo yourself in a place that doesn't fully take into consideration the expansiveness of some of these terms and what can actively fit within it. Intentionality can transform a mundane act into an act of worship. I sleep in order to do what? Not just for the sake of sleeping, but what does it bring me to? Mindful eating. Why am I fueling my body? What is it bringing me to? Why do I work in the way that it works? Shifting paradigms. So my job is not my primary identity variable, but it's something I do as a means to get livelihood that's written for me anyway, in a way that's permissible and pleasing to God, so that it equips me to do all the other things that I do in the course of my life. But here she's saying he is continuously worshiping Allah. He's engaged in this practice, and what he's doing in it is the worship of the divine. Do you get what I mean? So they're not separate things categorically. His reflection, his contemplation, his seclusion, his khalwa, it's being categorized within the framework of ibadah. Ibadah is not just, I'm going to pray my prayers. It is an important part, the most important part. You need to pray your 5 daily prayers. May Allah make us from amongst those who are steadfast in our daily prayers. But the expansive nature of it becomes important to understand more broadly in terms of what this thing entails categorically. So she's saying that this is what it was that he would do. And he would do this continuously, but he would now want to go back to see his family, right? Still a very human person at the end of the day. He's not running away from something. You get what I mean? There's not like the existence in a cycle of shame that can only be disrupted by like real love and empathy. That's what breaks it down. Most of us live in cycles of shame. And then we avoid conflict. We blame others for what it is that we can't necessarily digest for ourselves. We pretend like it doesn't happen. And I need to just reinvent myself, but not in a proactive way. I'm just trying to avoid something that inevitably I'm going to have to confront in some capacity. It's so remarkable how much this man loves his family and how much he values them and the time that he spends with them. He's trying to figure things out. He still wants to be with Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha. He's in a place where it's not novelty that he pursues, but there's gratitude that comes into the play. He used to take with him food for the stay and then come back. Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, take food likewise again, till suddenly the truth descended upon him while he was in the cave of Hira. Haqq is something that is just about reality. Do you get what I mean? Right? What is the opposite of haqq in Arabic? Or one opposite. There's probably a lot. Batil. What does batil mean? Why are you whispering to me?
I don't know the exact translation.
Well, if one word means truth and the other is the opposite, so what does it mean? Huh? Falsehood, right? Etymologically, when you look at haqq versus batil, it's not just about truth and falsehood. Haqq etymologically is rooted in stability. Batil is something that is unstable. So this is about embracing what is real, not like what is delusional or the facade of reality. It's why, like you're taught, when you have real iman, you would detest to go to a place where you don't have it, like the state you were in prior to. Not because you're being mean to people or judging people, but when you've tasted like what is real, why would you want to go back to what is unreal? When you have what is contentment, why would you want complacency? You see? This is why you have the du'as that we ask Allah to help us see what is truth as actual truth and what is falsehood as falsehood, because you want to have stability and not have instability. You want to have like conviction that is concrete, that allows for you, even the world around you gets shaky, your inside has a grounding that is rooted in something that is stable enough to carry you through the most difficult of storms, the most difficult of experiences. Do you get what I mean? This is a man who buried so many of his children prior to this moment. This is a man who doesn't have his father from the time he is born, loses his mother, loses his grandfather, goes through all kinds of different experiences. And he's a place now at 40 years of age, when he's in this cave, reality hits. This is where I can now make sense of what it is that's around me. What creates shakiness, it's not there. And what comes after now is the method through which that which is stable has a mechanism of creating stability. What happens here? The angel squeezes him. There's pressure that's there. There's not ease, there's struggle that's there. He comes and holds you to this point of heaviness. It's hard. And what does he tell him to do? He tells him to do the one thing that he cannot fundamentally do. Iqra, read. Ma'ana biqari, I'm not able to read. In our tradition, the Prophet is one who cannot read or write. So for him to have the capacity to respond in this moment, engage in this conversation, it's remarkable. It happens again. He gets squeezed again. It happens again. The revelation comes down. But the process through which he is able to receive the revelation necessitates the difficult process of the angel's engagement with him thrice over, until he gets to a place where he's willing to just relent to what it is that the process is meant to yield. You cannot have spiritual ascension if there's nothing to improve upon. And sometimes the mode through which you improve is going to come with ease, but a lot of times it's going to come with difficulty. A lot of times it's going to come with struggle. A lot of times you're going to get squeezed by life. You're going to be in a place where there's pressure. The Prophet's unique capacity is that this happens to him back to back to back, all at once. You ever sat down with somebody, man, and they have this epiphanatic experience? My friend was in a car accident, and it made me just think about life. I lost this person as a child. I saw somebody who was drunk. When I was in high school, I didn't even know when my friends started drinking, right? I wasn't particularly the most practicing of Muslims growing up, but I never drank. I didn't do drugs. Most of like the haram things that people did in high school, we just didn't do those things. And people respected me enough that they didn't necessarily push me away. I had a lot of friends, alhamdulillah, but I didn't socialize with them. And I remember one night, this kid who was my best friend from the time I was in kindergarten called me up in our senior year in the middle of the night, and he's in tears. And he said that his girlfriend was just vomiting excessively from alcohol poisoning, and he didn't know what to do. And I talked to him, and she got to the hospital, and she was fine, alhamdulillah. But then I asked another one of my friends, when did you guys start drinking alcohol? Like, how is this something that just suddenly started to come up in the course of your life? We quite often have those moments spread out over a period of time. Somebody didn't let me marry the person I wanted to. My family did this to me or that to me. A friend fought with me in a way that I never expected. You have challenging experiences or eye-opening experiences, but they're not necessarily like 3 in a row, back to back to back, and over the course of a period of time. This is where you take an objective look at yourself and how your level of practice changes as you get older, and how you relate to faith changes, how you relate to yourself, how you relate to other people. But it's a product still of the yesterdays that you've lived. And the things that bring you to where you are today are matters of ease as well as matters of difficulty. The Prophet had this happen 3 times over in a short period of time simultaneously. And then at some level, he's just got to give into it. That's what submission is. I don't know what's best. Allah knows what's best. Even in this hardship, there's some ease that will come from it. Do you get what I'm saying? So I'd like you to do, just in this first part of the hadith, what are other things that come up? The nature of the interaction with the angel, the importance of this moment taking place in Hira, a place that he frequents for this aspect of solitude. How do we take from it things that become relevant to where we are today? Not the hadith in its entirety, just the part that comes to the first part of the revelation. So the Prophet is still in the mountain, he's in the cave, he hasn't gone home yet to talk to Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha. What are some of the things that it makes you think about? If you can turn to the persons next to you and just discuss this for a bit, what's coming up for you, and then we'll come back and discuss. But go ahead.
Like, I really don't have this kind of I have nothing.
How you doing? You doing okay? Yeah, it's good to see you.
that's what you're saying,
I should. She didn't really say like, "Oh, get over it," or no, like, "Can you?" You were like listening to him.
I'm just thinking about this. Yeah. Every time there's something bad happens. Yeah. So I'm just thinking now. I'm like, yeah, the love of also. Yeah.
It's a great duo right here. This is a great duo right here.
The hats?
Yeah. You guys are made for each other.
I got mine for free. Like, I should be like, hey, what's up, how you doing? Because people really like so now, what I can do is I don't have smart you can relate to it. Because you know it's going to come.
Also, how
Okay, so what are some of the things coming up we can take away from this also? Insights that we can extrapolate. What do we discuss?
I realized that me and this guy, we got the coolest hats in this room.
Kevin, I like yours too, man.
That's on a lighter note.
Other thoughts?
Here's
Yeah, sorry.
Hi. The most profound thing for me has been about stability, truth, and falsehood in the cave. And my cave is beauty, but it goes back to falsehood and stability and truth. Like when it came to like me with the noise of the city, the just things people would deem as ugliness versus cleanliness, that for me would be falsehood. It would just be chaos, but not the truth. And I always felt like New York was my peace. I'm not born here, but it was a certain beauty, a silence of the city. And like my cave in the city is Wall Street because at night it's so peaceful.
Oh yeah.
But it's the most busiest under the current type of place. But I find peace in the motion, you know. And this thing about submission, I learned that I had to listen. I thought I would feel like I didn't have a problem with listening, but I was listening to the wrong voice. And I was tired of people telling me this and that, society, this and that. I was like, I need enough. And I realized I needed to truly submit to the true voice, like not anyone telling me like family rules or this and that. Like they wouldn't know me like Allah knows me. You know, they don't know. They have no knowledge. You know, so my peace became beauty, because for me, beauty is the truth. No one can like construct beauty or take it away. It just is. So I just sought beauty, and that is my peace.
Alhamdulillah, Jazakallah khair. I used to live downtown at Hanover Square, a block away from Wall Street, and it was amazing because at a certain time of the day, all the noise just stopped, you know, and it was just the quietest part of Manhattan that you could be in, mashallah. But that's like the whole idea, right? The whole idea. That's why ihsan is called ihsan. It's rooted in hasana, which is beauty, but it's a particular type of beauty. It's a beauty related to perception, like a beauty of the eye, you know. And so the whole idea is to find beauty in everything, to find like meaning, to find goodness within everything, you know. But thank you for sharing. Other thoughts? Like what comes up as we're, yeah.
Something that we discussed is based upon what you said, that you have to love yourself enough to be able to sit by yourself and to be able to sit alone. And sometimes the thoughts that come to you, the things, the revelations, that the self-reflections you have are scary, and similar to that Hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, like initially he was scared by the angel coming to him, and sometimes our truths are scary, but being able to overcome that and being able to come through that, and spending when you're alone doing things that are truthful, or doing things that are engaged, like doing things that are good and make you look forward to spending that time alone, versus if you spend your time alone engaged in acts of that aren't so good, then you don't look forward to it as much, and you're scared to be alone because you don't know what you'll let yourself do.
And if you know who Allah is, right, and you read Allah's book, He tells you He's Wadud, He's Al-Wadud. So God's love for you is not because of who you are, but God's love for you is because of who He is. If someone says, how do you know God loves you? It's because He tells you that He is Al-Wadud. There's not in our theology an understanding that Allah is based off of actions, right? Like Allah is Al-Khaliq whether He created us or not. His being Al-Khaliq is not because He created and then He was Al-Khaliq. He's Al-Khaliq always. He's Al-Wadud always. There's not moments where God stops being God, because then God would not be God. Do you understand? That love is a perfect love. It's unconditional because it takes us in within a recognition of the imperfections that we have. So when you can allow for yourself to be connected to the divine, it helps you to also be able to love yourself fully, knowing everything that it is that you know about yourself, that you've lived every day with yourself, the things you like, the things you dislike, and also become a mechanism through which you start to love others fully for who they are in their totality, and not just loving the parts of them that remind you of yourself, or getting irritated by the things that are perceived shortcomings and inadequacies, you know? It's hard sometimes if it's just me alone with me. Like, what do I do? And then the thoughts come up, but you're bigger than any one of your thoughts, because who's thinking the thoughts, right? Just like you're bigger than any of the feelings, because somebody's got to be feeling the feelings. And so that initial push is not in a vacuum. Shaitan is going to know where to tweak your buttons. He's going to know where to get you at your vulnerabilities and insecurities. You get over that hump, and it allows for there to be an opportunity of just gain through self-reflection and self-understanding. Other thoughts that we can take from this first part of this hadith? So a key thing that you want to see from here also is that there's a link between the physical and the metaphysical. The physical act of the squeezing creates now the opportunity for the heart to be ready for receiving revelation. We went for Umrah last week. May Allah accept it from us, right? I gave out a survey and people filled it out, and a consistent number of people who filled out this thing said we weren't like sleeping. It would have been nice if there was more time in the schedule to sleep. I've never walked this much in my life, right? In our tradition and other traditions, pilgrimages quite often incorporate physical movement. And there's a link between physical motion and a motion of your inside. So the physicality of it can't be understood to just be about what is outward and external alone, but to see how that becomes a mechanism for the inward to reach its highest of potentials. The physical pressure that the Prophet feels creates now an opportunity for the inward state to be ready to receive. And when we talk about this next week, his receiving the revelation doesn't mean that he automatically understood what it was that he just went through. Because he got it, but now he doesn't know what he just had happen to him. He goes to his wife, right? We just read the Hadith in its entirety. If you don't understand the Arabic, you read the English, right? But he goes and he lets out all the agitation. She takes it in, gives him the affirmation that he needs. But he got the revelation. That's not the end point. The end point is being able to make sense now of what did I just go through. You can't name it right in the moment always, because you're going to quite often mislabel what it is that you're feeling. If you're overwhelmed with anger, you're overwhelmed with sadness, you're overwhelmed with anxiety, you just got to a place where your world got rocked, you're knocked off your balance, and then you try to figure it out. I say this to people all the time. If somebody's drowning in front of us, we won't ask them while they're drowning, hey man, how does it feel to drown? And even when they get out of the water and they're in a place of stability, there's no way they're going to be able to have processed everything they just went through. They're going to need some time before they can make sense and name accurately what it was that just happened. It's a process. You have to have the patience to be able to be ready to not just receive, but to then understand what was received also. None of it's going to be able to happen if there's not already a set of exercises that allows for that reflective, contemplative mode to not give in to the immediacy of gratification, the immediacy of naming something, the immediacy of saying, this only means this. That's where all these things tie together. Silence becomes important. Places to go and reflect, knowing your cave. Finding good people that you could turn to who are going to want to listen to your story. Hear what you have to say, and they're empathetic in their listening to understand rather than listening to respond. The Prophet wouldn't arguably have received this revelation if not for the pressure he experienced with the angel. You can't run away from certain things. That's why you are a person that believes in an akhirah. May Allah make us people of Jannah. You don't walk away from struggle. You embrace struggle in whatever capacity you can. And then when it gets hard, you are also a person that someone can lean on and turn towards. He doesn't go into his house and his wife says, maybe you shouldn't be spending so much time in the mountains. Right? She just listens. You figure out what your cave is, and then you figure out the people who you have in your life, that the only thing that's going to have you leave the cave is to go and be in their presence. That doesn't come from having superficial engagement in relationships. We'll talk about this more, but it's important. I want you to think about it because we'll discuss it. I got married. I don't know if any of you were at my wedding. I know Ibad was at my wedding, right? You might have been the only one. Was anybody else at my wedding? We had an open invite to our wedding. I got married 12 years ago, alhamdulillah, right? Some of you were maybe 6 years old at that time. Oh my God. What the hell? So, when I got married, my wife amazing human being. I said, hey, it'd be great. We just have an open like wedding ceremony. We had a wedding at the 96th Street Masjid. They said that day, if you ever been to 96th Street, has anybody ever been to the 96th Street Masjid before? They had 5 jama'ahs for Asr that day because of how filled the masjid was. And they couldn't fit people for one Asr prayer. They had to do it 5 times over because of the number of people that showed up at the wedding. Alhamdulillah. It was all well-wishers. Really amazing experience. A month into our marriage, after the wedding, wedding's done now, it's marriage, my wife said, you don't have any friends. And I said to her, what do you mean? Do you see the thousands of people that showed up at our wedding? She said, you don't have any friends. She said, you don't invest in relationships. You don't put time into it. Every part of my nafs was fighting against it. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to admit it. It didn't stop there. My wife, amazing person, the best person I could be married to. She knows how to put me in my place, not in a terrible way, but to help me do. None of you are going to tell me things the way that my wife tells me things. Do you know what I mean? She talked to me about my physical wellness, non-existent. Self-care strategies, they weren't there. But this thing of friendship, it stuck with me in a way that when I was open to this reality, I was like, she's right. I don't. These are not like secrets, but you have to think about the obstacles to them. Why don't you have a cave? What gets in the way? Why don't you have deep relationships? What are you spending most of your time doing? Chasing after the money so that somebody else, after you leave from this world, is going to enjoy it? What sense does it make? These false statures of prestige and success. Whose dream are you actually chasing after? Here, the Prophet has a difficult experience and he knows exactly who to go to. You can't think about it in a self-deprecating way, but if there is a gap that isn't filled, step number 1 is being able to say, I don't have that. My wife said it to me, I pushed back against her immensely. What are you talking about? All these people came to our wedding, they like me, la la la. You don't have any friends. And then when I was able to admit it, it allowed for me to get to a different relationship with my prayer, with my fasting, with all of these other rituals, because I had a different relationship with myself through being able to relate to these other people around me. You understand? You can take all of these things from this interaction with this part of the Seerah. The Prophet ﷺ, he gets this revelation. He is now recipient of what is going to be the last revelation sent to mankind. This is the starting point of a final testament. There's no wahi after this. It is momentous because this is something that hasn't happened for almost 6 centuries. The time that Isa alayhi salam walked on the earth in relation to this moment is a long period of time. This man who is a shepherd, who was an orphan, this man who was known as being honest and trustworthy, who went through the realities of burying his children, who passed, experiencing loss and joy, going through these exercises of highs and lows. At 40 years of age, his heart is ready to now be the vessel through which this revelation is given for all of humanity. And it starts with him going through struggle. And then 23 years, he doesn't stop, man. He's already forgiven. Who is he doing it for, if not for you? And so just think about it. Take a meaning from it. And then understand how you honor this moment. You don't even read the Quran? Come on. What are you waiting for? Somebody else to tell you what it says? Go pick it up and read it. With a magnificence, it's something that descends into the heart of the best of creation, the chieftains of the angels in his truest of forms. The Prophet says wherever he looks in the horizons, all is the angel Gabriel in his eye line. It just sits on a shelf in your house. That can't be the case anymore. You got to want to be able to engage it and to draw meaning from it. It's for you to understand. He didn't do this so that you and I sit here and pretend like we don't have access to something that is amazingly magnificent. And we meet next week. We'll look through the rest of this. We'll talk about where it's now in the immediate after that first revelation. And we'll begin at 7, inshallah, next week instead of at 6 o'clock. So just a couple of things before we break. On Saturday, there's going to be a convert brunch at Solo's house, their brother Solomon. If you're a convert, recent or from some time ago, you're exploring Islam, or you're a family member, partner of somebody in that situation, the brunch is open to you. It's not open to everyone. This is if you're not Muslim and you converted to Islam. If you were born into a Muslim family and you found faith later, which is like an experience of a lot of us, you're not a convert to Islam, right? So that's not you. And that's not offensive to anybody. We're talking about people who have to deal with the reality that their family is not Muslim. They grew up in a non-Muslim home, culturally, racially, ethnically, every which way, right? You could be somebody who has like experience as being atheistic, etc. That's different. But we're not talking about that we all are kind of in this space. This is like for those demographics. Does that make sense? If you want questions on that, let me know. Khalid is here. Angie is here also. And we can give you more kind of advice and directions on it. Khalid is also in the back. I'm not talking about myself in the third person, right? So there's two of us in the room who work for the IC. On Saturday also, we have an all-day seminar that's taking place here. Sheikh Muhammad Shanawi is going to be talking about the proofs of prophethood. I'd recommend joining. I think there's not so many seats left. There are over 200 some people who have registered. I think the room fits 250. So sign up. If you can't afford the price, there's a discount code for us that's half off. And there's also scholarships as well. And so don't let the finances be an impediment. We do this with the Al-Maghrib Institute, so the tuition charge goes to them. It's not something the IC is charging, but we don't want that to be a reason why someone doesn't go. That's going to be all day on Saturday from 10 to 7. It's something you want to kind of take consideration of, learning a little bit more in detail some of these things. And then from next week, we'll go back to our normal hours of operation, inshallah, have our regular halakas and iftars and things again as the semester starts again, inshallah, from this coming Monday. Okay, so let's take a pause here. We're going to make a jama'ah for Isha. If people haven't prayed, if you want to make a quick wudu, we'll pray, and then the building closes in about 15 minutes, so we'll need to head out right after that, inshallah. Okay, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Was it not working?